Rozier-Audubon days, and we're so pleased to have you here. And of course, our operation here is funded solely by admissions and grants and sponsorships, and we are so pleased that Audubon Restaurant has sponsored the whole weekend activities. So we thank them very much for that. So I hope you've been following all of our presentations throughout the day. We've had some very interesting ones. Carolyn, of course, who just left. Oh no, you're still here. She had an encore presentation of her presentation from yesterday when we had the official ribbon cutting of our Ferdinand Audubon display out there, which I think you'll find fascinating if you haven't had a chance to look at it. So we're going to continue now with a little bit later years for the Rozier family. Robert Mueller is a local historian. Of course, we all know Bob. He is a genealogist, reenactor, and tour guide. He's a member of the MLC de Saint-Geneviève. How's my French? Les Amis, Missouri Preservation, and the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. He's been a trustee of the State Historical Society of Missouri since 2006 and has served on the executive committee since 2009. Bob recently was elected to the board of the Center for French Colonial Studies. He is a past president of the Foundation for Restoration of St. Genevieve, coordinates the Foundation's annual history conference, and is a member of the Foundation's Speakers Bureau. Bob has appeared in the movie New Offenburg on the television program Who Do You Think You Are? With Melissa Etheridge, and authored a chapter in the book The American Revolutionary War in the West. He most recently published an article, Give Us This Day, Our Daily Bread, in the Le Journal, published by the Center for French Colonial Studies. So, as you can tell, he has done quite a lot, and he is our go-to guy whenever we have any historical question about St. Genevieve or the region, and we are so pleased to have him here. He is going to talk about the Rozier after Audubon, his life, family, and legacy. So please, give a round of applause for him.
Thanks, Stephanie. When they ask me a question, I turn around and ask Jim Baker the question. When I study history, and a lot of the books that have been written about history are before 1804, you know, the French colonial period, the Spanish period. And there was a very wealthy family, the Francois Vallée family, and his sons. You know, you had Jean-Baptiste, Francois, Charles, Joseph. So that family was the family of colonial St. Genevieve. Our Rozier family is the post-colonial family of St. Genevieve. They even left a longer legacy than the Valley family. And so I'm going to talk about that today, if I can. So you've seen these portraits before, and Carolyn did a marvelous job of taking the Audubon-Rozier relationship up to 1840. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Ferdinand the person. And after Audubon left in 1812, the next year, Ferdinand marries Constance Roy. Now, Constance was born in Prairie du Rocher to André Roy and Constance Barbeau. And when you study colonial St. Genevieve, the Barbeau girls, there were 5 of them, and they all married well. So they married into wealth. Well, Constance her mother was the only one that stayed on the other side of the river. Well, they end up dying, and so Constance comes to live with her aunt and uncle, who happened to be Jean-Baptiste Vallée and his wife, Jean Barbeau. So she's already connected in St. Genevieve. And in 1813, in August, they got married. This is a copy of their church burial or marriage record. Ferdinand Rozier had this wonderful, wonderful signature. You could tell he was well educated. That little squirrely thing is called a paraph, and the French that could write really always had a very fancy paraph. Constance, on the other hand, probably didn't have a great education like Ferdinand did, but she still could spell her name. We have Francois Vallée Sr. couldn't sign his name at first. All he could spell eventually was Valley. Louis Bolduc, another rich guy, he always had a mark, couldn't spell his name. So We can tell by this that Ferdinand is pretty well educated. Well, after they get married the next year, he purchases that house on the left. And that house he did not build that house. It was built by Jacob Philipson, who was a Jewish merchant that had come down here, and he had built also the Felix Valley house. And so this was a house where he would have his home and his business. Now, we don't know where he lived when he and Audubon came here, and we don't know where his store was. I wish we did. We've been doing searching. This is a plat of that location. And again, we have to thank Rozier Sharp for that when Carolyn went down to see him. But the deed says it was a lot of ground situated in this village of St. Genevieve, well fenced, bordered on the west by the land of Moreau the Hatter, on the east by the land of Parfait Dufour, on the south by the land of Henry Dodge, and on the north by a public street. On this property is a house made of wood with 2 stories, newly constructed, other buildings, an orchard, garden, diverse things, I like how they say that, attached to the said house and on the said land. I will have to give a credit to the French. When they do a deed, they describe a lot of things. The Americans would say, oh, it's on these meets and bounds, and that's it. We know what's on the property. Rozier was a great writer. We have a lot of his letters. He said, my ambition is not large. I live by my trade. You know that we will not succeed in everything, and we must balance the good and the bad success. But I have won the upper hand, and I hope that without any bad accidents, I'm going to live decently. He was never very sure about his future all the time, but he later, in 1818, he was writing his brother Firmin back in France. I guess Firmin had written him and said, boy, I'm working hard. And Ferdinand wrote back, he said, it seems that you make a lot of business and that you work a lot. I am not surprised because I know you sense that you have the sense you have in business. It is a heritage that you share with our deceased father. So this thing about working hard with the Rozier starts back in France with the first Rozier. I think he went on to say, I do not place to my account particularly the good and the bad success. I make myself the sort, acquire some property, and some which keeps my family with decency. So he was really working hard after Audubon left. So about 1822, another guy shows up from France, and this is Firmin Deloge. And Firmin was the son of Joseph Deloge and Marie-Angelique Rozier. And Marie-Angelique was Ferdinand's sister. She had 3 older sons, and then she had this son, Firmin. And when he was age 14, the 3 other brothers were well entranced in business in France. They were doing well. But she had this 14-year-old. She didn't know what she was going to do with him. She writes her brother, Ferdinand, says he has been successful in his studies and might someday have recourse to your goodwill by being useful to you. I should be delighted to have him with you. He could not have a better guide. Well, it was about a few years later that young Firmin, or his mother, writes again, I'm asking, dear Ferdinand, for your care and your kindness and that of your good wife for our child. We have little hope of seeing him again. Back in those days, a lot of times when these immigrants would come across, they would never see their parents again. And it could be very traumatic for the child and could be very traumatic for the parents. We have for our consolation, we will need the hope that you will take our place by your advice and care. His youth deprives him of experience, but his conduct and good disposition make me hope that he will try in every way to please you and to be useful to you. Well, he did. He comes here, he works for Ferdinand for about 6 months, and then Ferdinand gives him a loan, and or not Ferdinand, Ferdinand gives him a loan of about $2,300, and he goes over to what is now Potosi, at that time it was called Mina Breton, and sets up a mercantile store with a Mr. Daly. About a couple of years later, he buys out Daly, and he moves across the creek from Mina Breton to what is now Potosi in Washington County. So the relationship between Ferdinand and Furman is different than the relationship between Ferdinand and his children. And you're gonna hear some of the things that he writes about his children and his concerns. But he got along really good with this young man throughout his life. So Ferdinand he had opened up a store here. In 1822, he opened up a store in Perryville. But he was also doing some political things during this time period. St. Genevieve was first incorporated in 1808, August, the first one in the state of Missouri. And then again, it was reincorporated in 1825, and then again in 1849, and then again in 1867 for various reasons. But when it was done first in 1808, we had a board of trustees, and Ferdinand served as the chairman of that board of trustees. And then after that second incorporation, he would be St. Genevieve's first mayor, but not the last Rozier to be a mayor, as you'll hear later. I mentioned that he had a strong relationship with well, back up just a minute. He would make, as I think Carolyn said, that he'd make a lot of trips. He would go to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, New Orleans, mostly to buy goods. And after he opened up a store in Perryville, thanks to Joe Rozier, one of the descendants, we have his ledger. And it's 560-some pages of who he sold to, what he sold, and how much he made for it. He sold stuff to Bishop Rosati, who was starting a seminary down in Perryville. This is one of the real early ones because he's selling them locks and nails and things like that, so they're kind of building it then. He's also selling stuff to Sister Benedicta, who was a sister of Loretto, who had a mother house down there at the time. And she was getting slate and lead pencils, ink stands, shoe horns, coffee roaster, curtain material, auger, and log chain. I still wonder what the nuns were doing with a log chain. He was also selling to a variety of other firms, but in particular, he would sell stuff to Firmin Deloge over in Potosi. And this actually went on for 3 pages, but you can see the kind of things that they are selling to this. This is still kind of a frontier community. Washington County had been established in 1813, and so it's pretty rough over there. These are miners. But he's selling 3 dozen spelling books to them. Suspenders, calico cloth, child's hats, nutmeg, mustard, tea kettle, coffee mill, tin cups, cowbells, that was kind of unusual, and horse and shoe brushes. So, and this journal is going to be so valuable to us because we can really tell what's going on, what people are buying, how they're living in the 1827-1830 period. That's a difficult period for us to study because there's no newspapers that are around. We do have some records in the St. Genevieve archives, but we don't have this kind of detail. And so when we try to present or build a picture of a person living during that time period, 1810, 1850, we have to use things like this to paint a picture of the person. So I'm kind of up to 1840, and this was, I call it a turning point, a change in direction. And he writes to his nephew Furman, I'm going to read this. My great age and my shattered health warned me that I ought to think of retiring and finding a substitute for continuation of my business. He goes on to say that he has the only choice he can think about is his oldest son, Ferdinand Jr., who's working for Furman Deloge over in Potosi, to have him come home and run the business in St. Genevieve and Perryville. Even though Ferdinand was doing a lot of business, he was growing a fertile business, he was growing a fertile family, as a lot of the people back then. By 1840, he had 8 sons and 2 daughters. So he's thinking about retiring, and the youngest son is 7 years old. But Ferdinand is ill quite often. He's got arthritis, and you can tell it in his writing that he's starting to suffer. But before 1840, he did make one trip to France. In 1825, he got on the ship Montana, and he took his 2 eldest sons to France for education. And he left them there. He left them there for 5 years. And were they, as Carolyn pointed out, Ferdinand was from Nantes, which is right here near the coast. It's actually up a river, not exactly on the coast. And so the boys were sent to Nantes for under some religious supervision to learn, but they didn't take to it too well. So their aunt took them to Angers, which is up the road there. You can see it up here. And this is all in the Loire Valley, where they have all those beautiful chateaus and all of that stuff. I'm not sure why they left, but so that he took them there, and they were supposed to learn. See if I can get this. But as I'll explain as I go through each of the kids, there were problems that happened in that learning and didn't meet Ferdinand's expectations. Carolyn mentioned that after 1840, he started giving his business. The one thing, he didn't give the businesses to his sons. He sold them to his sons. And that characteristic is a good characteristic of the Rozier family, and that's why they do well. I told you I wouldn't talk about him, but he's teaching his grandson, Jules V, to be a merchant. But he did get rid of his real estate holdings, and they were pretty vast. They were all over the place and around here in the big field and other places, and he would sell them off. One of the things he did was about 1850 is he donated land to the city of St. Genevieve on the corner of Washington and Main, just that behind the Herdick House. He gave that land to the city for their first public school building that they built. We call it the first school. And there was supposed to be a market house behind that. I don't know if they ever built the market house, but they did build the school. Ferdinand, these are pictures later in life. I think these are actually from photographs, aren't they, that were colorized? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they aged well. He would die in 1864, right in the middle of the Revolutionary War. Constance would die in 1878. And there's only one of their children that's buried in Memorial Cemetery with them, a mob, Edward, who's one of the later children. But this is the Rozier plot. On the left is Ferdinand's grave, and on the right is Constance's grave, and in the middle is, he went by a mob E and Edward A, so sometimes it gets a little confusing. But thanks to Joe, they cleaned this up recently. There was a little bit of brush in there, and so they're taking care of the family tombstones. His house was torn down in 1908, and of those of you that remember Steiger Inn downtown, next to the old bakery building, that's where this stood. And we know that it was torn down in 1908. There's a newspaper article, and there's a view that was shot for the 1908 Drummers Association meeting, and you can see the bakery building, and you can see Emil Vought's house next door where Treasured Memory is, but there's a vacant lot where that is. This building, this outbuilding, is one of the great treasures of St. Genevieve. So it's an outbuilding. It was where he would have stored goods and stuff. It's made out of brick. In 1911, in the downtown area, we had 115 outbuildings, not counting privies, just outbuildings. In 2011, we had 15. So when we talk about losing architecture and our history, outbuildings are one of the things that you lose the first. But we still have this. This is an incredible treasure to have here in St. Genevieve. So that kind of ends Ferdinand's life, and I'd kind of like to talk about his children. And we'll start with Ferdinand Roy, who was born in 1814. Oops, go one more. And if you look at the baptismal record, it doesn't say Roy, because we don't have a St. Roy. So he was always known as Ferdinand Jr., Ferd Jr. He would say Ferdinand, you could see Ferdinand R sometimes. At age 10, or before age 10, he was taught at what they called a subscription school. We had a guy named John D. Grafton who ran one here. At age 10, he went to St. Mary of the Barons, which was down at Perryville, and it was run by the Vincentians. And in 1825, I mentioned that Rozier took his sons to France, and Ferdinand Roy was one of those. And he would be over there for 5 years. And when he came home, his aunt, Marie Angelique, wrote, "He's not taking too much learning with him. He did not appreciate what sacrifices were made for him, and all he wants is freedom. He does not consider that he must work." For all of us that have had kids, that's kind of familiar. But he did go to work. And he starts to establish a pattern for Rozier boys. He gets sent over to Furman Deloge's business in Potosi. And he was there until 1833, when he was put in charge of the Perryville store. And that had started in 1822. He would stay until 1849, when he would buy something called Pratt's Landing. It was owned by Charles Gregoire, and it was about 600 acres, and eventually it became Rozier's Landing. There's a couple of neat things on this map. Way up in the upper corner is St. Mary's, spelled with an S on the end, as it should be. Here's Rozier's Landing here. So it's just south of St. Mary's after you make that turn. And down here is a town called Davis. I got to find out what that was. And this road is I think it's the Chester Turnpike. So that was in 1850. This is a wonderful map. It would soon become Rozier's Landing, and then in 1836, he marries Harriet Brady. Now, Harriet Brady was the daughter of Thomas Brady and Harriet Jones, another well-to-do family. Thomas Brady would become a business partner of Ferdinand Jr., because in 1850, he had purchased what was called the Rourke and Reardon tract near the Three Notch Road. The Three Notch Road was one of our first roads. It went from here to Mine Lamont. It snakes through southern St. Genevieve County, Perry County, back into St. Genevieve County, and then into Madison County. But there was a mill there, Rourke and Reardon, and it was in a flood and was destroyed. So they built a 4-story mill out of stone, and it ran for a few years, and then during the Civil War, it was burnt. And you can still see this mill if you go down southern St. Genevieve, northern Perry County, and we call it the old burnt mill. Really neat. We thought a lot into making that one up. Ferdinand would serve, like his father, in politics. He would be the county treasurer of Perry County, and for 6 years, and was a board member of an academy in Perryville. In 1854, he moved his family to St. Louis and went into business with a guy named Charles Tillman, And then they bought Tillman out, and it became Berthold Rozier and Company. Then in 1867, it was the Rozier Company. And after this, he came back, and he eventually died, but he's buried in Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis. So you have to go up there to find his tombstone. His wife, Harriet, died in 1896, and they only had 3 children. They were kind of unusual. They just had 3 children survive them. The next son was Francis Claude. You see him sign his name, Francis C., born in 1816. 8 years old, he's sent down to St. Mary's of the Barons. It's only 20 miles away, but he's away from home. Then he went to France with his brother Ferdinand, and Ferdinand wanted these kids to be well-rounded. He said that he wanted them to learn a little of everything: French and English, language and grammar, art, music, literature, science, mathematics, agriculture, mining, and business. Woo! That's like going to college when you're a kid. He kind of marveled at these 2 boys, Ferdinand and Francis. He said one was headstrong and one was docile. Francis would remain in France until he then went on, he said something else. He said they're like young trees, when properly handled, will grow straight and bear fruit. So he expected a lot out of his children. He would remain in France until 1830. And when he came back to America, guess who he went to work for? Firmin Deloge. Well, it was like the training ground to be a Rozier mercantile person. He bought a house over there and came back, married Marie Zoe Valley. So here's this is kind of the new generation marrying the old rich money generation. So that was pretty good. And she was a granddaughter of J.B. Valley, Sr. And then he would have to come back to St. Genevieve when his father started becoming ill. And he started to run the store here. And 2 years later, he bought the business from his father. His father did not give it to him. He bought it. And they lived at I call it the Andrew Wilder House, but it's really the J.B. Valley Junior House that was up at Little Rock Landing. It's a beautiful 2-story building. It burnt, I think, around 1936. So Francis bought one of the great architectural treasures of St. Genevieve that's no longer here, unfortunately. You can see what remains. It's called the parking lot of Audubon's. It was magnificent. And this is the first picture I have of it in a snowstorm, and it's so beautiful. And eventually there were wings added on, one to the south, and then later another one to the north. There's another great picture before the wings were added up on the upper left. There was another dwelling in the back. There's a smokehouse. There's a pigeon house, too, where they used to raise pigeons. I think they ate pigeons a lot more back then. We see Mrs. Vital St. Jean Beauvais selling pigeons to Dr. Louis Lynn. So instead of going to the Rozier store now, you can't get pigeons, unfortunately. Francis owned half of the block of Block 3, which is down there across there. But he also, that had 18 rooms in it and 1 bathroom. But when you read between the Gabbry, you can see the remembrances of Mary Rozier Sharp growing up and going to that house and going through the rooms, and it's a very personal description. Francis was civic-minded. He was the county treasurer here, like his brother was in Perryville. Director of our first common school board. We actually had a school board 10 years before we had a school. Most of the time back then, everything was the beginnings of one-room schoolhouses, or you went to Perryville, or for higher education, you went to a place called the Asylum, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. He was a judge of the county court. Back then, we had, instead of having our county commissioners like like the present, they would have county judges, and you'd be elected either the presiding judge or just a judge. He was once elected mayor of St. Genevieve, and he joined with the firm. He was building or working down on Main Street, and in 1875, and when we start talking about the businesses, we'll come back to that. It became known as Rozier and Jokers, and he dies in 1879, and he's buried in a memorial cemetery. But then, when his wife died later, they dug him up and moved him to Valley Springs Cemetery. So that's kind of why Edward A. is the only one there. This magnificent house was torn down in 1960. I wish we still had it. So the next son is Joseph Adolphe Rozier, and he went by J. Adolphe. He was born in 1817. Like his brothers, he studied at the school of Joseph Grafton, and then at age 10, he's sent to Perryville to St. Mary of the Barons. After that, he came back to St. Genevieve and he read law with Nathaniel Pope of Kaskaskia and also John Scott. Back then, you didn't normally go to law school. You just read law for a while and somehow you became a lawyer. But he started practicing down in New Orleans. And so he moved down there in 1839. And Ferdinand Sr. would go visit him, especially like in 1840 when his arthritis was acting up. He thought if he went down to New Orleans, he would, the climate's different, a little warmer, he would feel better. And then in 1842, the second trip that Ferdinand Sr. took, he only took J. Adolphe with him, and they went to Paris, and well, it was really the whole voyage is from St. Louis to Niagara Falls to New York. Adolphe goes down to Washington, D.C. It's a long trip over, but they stay over there for a year. Ferdinand was visiting relatives. His parents had died. I think by that time Marie Angelique had died. But he's getting back to his roots. J. Adolphe goes up to Paris and studies French law, which would help him. I mean, we're still, even though this is after the Americans came in, there are still legal cases that are being discussed in French. So this was very helpful to him. He would come back in 1843 and come up, but then he'd come up with a steamboat to St. Genevieve, and he marries Clotilde Pelagie Valley, who is the daughter of Jean-Baptiste Valley Jr. So you're going to hear more Valley girls marrying Rozier boys. So he's still down in New Orleans when the Civil War is about ready to break out. So they form a committee for a big convention of the state of Louisiana. And he was on that committee, but he was the only one that said he didn't want to vote for secession. I don't think they liked him very much for that, but so when they actually went to vote on the ordinances for secession, there were only 5 people that voted against it, and he was one of them. It said that it wasn't so much that he was, against slavery. It was that he thought the Union should be the Union, and it shouldn't be split apart. So he had some strong principles. He was on the board of the Charity Hospital, which is a big hospital down in New Orleans. Later, Lincoln wanted to appoint him to a federal post, but he declined. Then they wanted to appoint him to the Louisiana Supreme Court. He declined. And there was they had wanted him to be the U.S. Attorney General in Louisiana, and he declined. So he just wanted to remain in practice. He would be the head of the New Orleans Bar Association for 15 years. And he died in New Orleans in 1896, and his wife Clotilde in 1891. And they're buried across the river from New Orleans in Metairie Cemetery, and I couldn't find a tombstone for them. The next one that we have, next son, so we're on the third son, I guess, here, Furman Andrew Rozier. his signature is a little more severe, I think. But at age 12, guess where he was sent? Perryville. And at age 17, he became bored with school, and he got on as a deckhand on the steamer Vandalia. Well, Ferdinand was a little concerned about this, so he buys an interest in the Vandalia. It was I think you mentioned the barge that Ferdinand, he was kind of in the ship business a little bit. He found life on the river very hard and unsuitable for his health. Let's not work with our hands and get dirty, I think is what it was. So he went to St. Louis and became a partner with one of the Shudo men. That lasted for a few years until there was a financial crisis. So he comes back here to Perryville and works with his brother, Ferdinand Jr. And so he's got a political bent too. In 1844, he was appointed a designate to the Whig convention in Baltimore. He said he didn't go because he said money is the weapon of society which gives weight to influence, and he was not thrilled with the politics. In 1846, he received a commission in the Army, and he organized 115 men, and they were going to go to Mexico and beat Mexico and get that part of the world back in our area. But he went, I think, all the way out to Fort Leavenworth, and by that time the war was over, so they came home. And a few years later, he received a commission as a major general in the Southeast Missouri Militia, and he stayed. He was called the general from then on. He did decide to go to law school, and the school that he went to was called Transylvania School. It's over in Bardstown, Kentucky. We have a lot of lawyers that went there. He did graduate, and then he comes back and he marries Marguerite Valley, daughter of Jean-Baptiste Valley Jr., the second of the boys to marry one of his daughters. And in 1851, he is elected a mayor of St. Genevieve. So the first building we have of his is this, what is now Sarah's Ice Cream Shop. That was it. In 1850, he was a lawyer and counselor. This is an ad from 1853 for him. He did serve as the treasurer of something called the St. Genevieve Iron Mountain and Pilot Knob Railroad, or Plank Road, which was a wooden road that went for 42 miles from here to Iron Mountain. It only lasted about 10 years until they built a train line. Carolyn mentioned the academy. In 1854, he began remodeling it, and he added that two-story back wing. I guess you can see it on the right there. It goes kind of at a right angle to it. He opened this school of higher education, and it was known as the Academy, and would operate during the Civil War. I think for a session was $75. And you can see there's different things that are extra. Higher English was $15. So if you wanted to, and that building, I call this the first restoration project in St. Genevieve. Because when that building was built in 1808, it only operated for a few years. Then it went vacant, and then about 1820, the Christian Brothers came in and opened up a school for a few years, and then it sat vacant until Rozier decides he's going to make it into his school and his home. And we have this picture up in the upper left, which is a great picture of that area. That's way up on the hill there overlooking St. Genevieve. Not quite as many houses as we have now. But we do have existing advertisements for the Academy. He would go on to be elected to the Missouri State Legislature, serving 2 sessions, and then in 1872, he was elected to the State Senate, serving 4 years. So this tradition of serving in political areas continues in the Rozier family. He got in the banking business also, and he would experience 2 significant events that happened in St. Genevieve in our banking history. The first one was in August of 1861. The Civil War had just started in April, and in August of 1861, the federal troops from Cape came up and took all of our money out of our bank for safekeeping because we had a lot of Confederates around here. So Furman actually went to St. Louis with the money. He wasn't going to let it out of his sight. And so that was one of the first major things that happened. And then in 1873, we think the Jesse James gang, or the Younger brothers, robbed the Bank of St. Genevieve. And Furman was just going in when a couple of the gang members went inside. This is the start of an article from 1873 from the New York Times. This went all over the place. The James brothers really got a lot of notoriety. Sometimes when you see that you'll see a picture that the bank robbery occurred at the bank building the Bill Tlapic owns on the corner of 2nd and Merchant. Henry L. Rozier had his bank there, but that's not the building. This was the building, and it was across from Audubon's on that corner where the pergola is, next to Furman's little store. So one of the interesting things that happened was in the late middle 1880s, 1885. If you'd study the history of St. Genevieve, they were down on the river. 1785, there was this huge flood, and so they moved up here. And everybody says, okay, they moved that year. Well, that didn't happen. It took them 9 years to move the town and the church up to St. Genevieve. And so they're moving to the new town. Everybody thinks it was 1785. So in 1885, they decide to have a centennial celebration. So if you look at the newspaper, they had Centennial of St. Genevieve, Centennial Ball. Everything was centennial. Well, Furman, who was a good historian, writes this pamphlet that he's going to sell, and it becomes the 150th anniversary of St. Genevieve, and that's how we get 1735 on all of our signs. So I guess we can credit him with that. So, and we do have copies of this little pamphlet that he would sell. And then in a few years later, based on that pamphlet, he wrote a book called The History of the Early Settlement of the Mississippi Valley. And it covers St. Louis, St. Genevieve, has the list of all of our first mayors and clerks of the court and sheriffs. So it's a good piece of work. And you can find, I found, it's online, so you can take a look at it. Next son is Felix. He's born in 1822, fourth son. He was educated by Grafton again and attended St. Mary's of the Barrens. At age 16, he gets sent over to Furman Deloge to learn the business. 1838, Deloge writes Ferdinand, and this is what he said. He said, Felix was bored in Potosi. He could find nothing for Felix to do, as he seems to have a little aversion to all kinds of manual work. No comment. But he did in 1841, he was deputy sheriff over here in St. Genevieve County. And then in 1842, he went down to Pratt's Landing. His house was up on the hill. He buries Marie Louise Valley, another daughter of Jean-Baptiste Valley Jr. And he built a house not at Rosier's Landing, but here in St. Genevieve. And it's right next to where his brother Francis built his house. And here they became business partners in 1855. He kind of went a little bit of a different way. He decided to get involved in mining. And, the Deloges were into mining too. And that's how when they start all of this relationship between the valleys and the Loges and the Roziers gives a lot of opportunities for development of wealth. He was also part owner of a hotel in St. Louis called the Rozier Hotel, different things. It's a different ad, but He came back here. He'd serve on the Board of Aldermen. He was once mayor of St. Genevieve. He and his wife had 11 children. She would die in 1890, and he would die in 1908, and he's buried out at Valley Springs. The St. Louis paper said he was a millionaire when he died in 1908, so that's pretty good. He built a house right next to his brother Francis. It's still here. There's a picture from 1908, and it still shows that same fence that's in there with the nice clamshell finial. And it was offered for sale, I think about 1911 for $4,900. But in the late 1940s, 50s, the Dunseys ended up buying this property, and in 1974, it became the first B&B in Missouri, and it's still a B&B. It did have a fire about 10 years ago, but it was reconstructed. Finally, Ferdinand and Constance have a girl, Marie Lucille, born 1824. She did not get educated under Grafton and get sent to the seminary. She gets sent to the Visitation Convent over at Kaskaskia, which is where Girls of Wealth went. Ferdinand wanted to take her with them to France in 1842, but she was too timid. I guess she didn't feel strong enough, and so she didn't go. But she marries a guy named Dr. Charles S. Herdig. And Herdig was the son of a Swiss man who came to St. Genevieve, very well educated, and he started a school south of town here called the Asylum. And it was, I know of at least 3 future U.S. senators that were educated at the Asylum. I don't know if 3 common ones now were educated there, but it was a very good school, lasted probably 15, 20 years. So this Herdig was well connected to other families also. During the Civil War, he was the post surgeon here in St. Genevieve. He ended up having a stroke, and in 1888 he died and is buried in Valley Springs. Lucille, as she was called, Mary Louise Lucille, died in 1907. And they would have 8 children. So this is also a B&B currently called the Dr. Herdig House. We're back to having sons again, and here's the one that really creates the Rozier empire. Jules Rene, born 1826. Like his brothers, he's taught in a subscription school and sent to St. Mary of the Barons. So he's getting the same kind of education. 1844, he gets sent to work with Furman, Deloge, and Potosi. Furman wrote to Ferdinand, he says, Jules was willingly needed to be guided and encouraged to work. It is difficult to make him improve his writing, and commented that he had no taste for bookkeeping. Furman's a little tough, too, on the kids. He would receive a commission in what was called the Southeast Guards, that his brother Furman was captain. And he's one of the few that also escaped St. Genevieve area. In 1849, he went to the gold fields in California. And there were several other St. Genevieve people. Omer Gibord went. And there's actually a store they opened, I think, in Grass Valley, California, for a period of time. And after a couple of years, from what I've read, you made more money in the gold fields by selling stuff to miners than you did by mining gold. So he decides to come home. So he's going to take a ship to Panama, and they get stranded, and they have to be, somebody had to come help him. Then he get to Panama, and something happened there, and then he went to Mexico City, and then he took a carriage to Acapulco or someplace, and he finally gets to New Orleans. So he stays with his brother J. Adolph there. But what a trip to have back then. This is about 1850. So one of the things I found out about Rozier stores, sometimes they would start in a town and then they would kind of stop for a while and then they would start up again. First when he gets back around 1853, he opens up a mercantile store in Farmington, and it was called the Cheap Store. And it only lasted a couple of years, and he went back to Rozier's Landing, built a house up on the bluff. But in 1875, he moves to St. Mary's, and he builds this big mercantile business. It was called Rozier and Lawrence at first, but I'm not sure exactly when that Lawrence got out of there, but eventually became just Rozier. And Jules would go on to open stores in Perryville, in addition to Farmington, Jackson, Crystal City, and St. Genevieve. And some of these I'd never heard about until I started researching on this. He died in 1915, and his wife would die in 1922, and they had 8 children. And they are buried down at St. Mary's. And this is the only picture I've been able to find of his house in St. Mary's. It was on 3rd Street, below the church, a little bit to the right, and it burnt about 2015. So you can see there it's a little dark. But I think back in the late 1920s, early 1930s, the whole Rozier family had a reunion there and a big party on the hill. He was a philanthropist, had 8 children, so he was really what I consider the modern, the source of the modern Rozier family. So I'm going to go to the next one, which is a girl. But I want to say, in 1840, Frederick writes this: Ferdinand, you must know that for a long time I have been tormented and vexed by the conduct of my children, who think only of amusements and pleasure, and neglect business and leave me to bear all the burdens. I mean, his kids are from age 26 to age 7. There's high expectations if you're a Rozier kid, right? So what really happened that threw a monkey in the wrench was Felicity Louise, born in 1828. At age 8, she gets sent to Visitation Convent over in Kaskaskia. At age 13, she elopes with Frederick Christian Flam, and Ferdinand Sr. has a hissy fit for a long time. He was beside himself. He thought that this had disgraced the family. He refused to speak to Mr. Flam or even allow him in the house. And it caused a lot of consternation in the family. Some say that Constance was sent away for a while, but nobody could prove that. But for a long time, Ferdinand just didn't want to have anything to do with Felicite and her husband. So they eventually moved to St. Louis. She came back to St. Genevieve to have, I think, 2 children, had them baptized here, and then went back. And in 1848, they moved down to Natchitoches, Louisiana. He was evidently a music teacher. And he must have whispered sweet music to Felicity when she was 13. But he was going to teach down there, but he ends up dying of yellow fever. So he's actually buried in Natchitoches, Louisiana. She comes back, and I'm not sure when, but it said she lived with her parents. Maybe, but I don't know if Ferdinand was dead by then, but this was a real battle in the family because, like, Ferdinand Jr. was trying to get her back connected, and Ferdinand Sr. is not having any part of it. So she eventually, I think this is called the Flam House, and this is on the corner of Jefferson and 3rd. It's where, I guess, Blind Man Sucre lived, or right close there. But you can see the old mill that's down, the second mill in St. Genevieve that's down in the corner. This has all been torn down. She, I think, is buried up in St. Louis. But it was, when you say that Ferdinand had trouble and was vexed, this is the girl that did it. All the other boys finally came around, but I don't think...
Where did the picture of the house, that picture, come from?
Bill, I think, gave me that. Yeah.
I think I have the staircase to that house in my house. Betty and Bud Gary rescued it, but they always said it was from the Ham house.
Oh, I could have...
But as I look at Felicity's signature, it says Ham, but it's really an F and an L.
Yeah.
So I think that's got to be, that's the best picture of that house I've seen.
Yeah, I used it because I was talking about the mill in our last architectural thing. Okay, the next son is Charles Constant, and you wonder, okay, where did Constant come from? Well, Constant is the French male version of Constance. So he's named after his mother. Interesting story about Charles. He was crippled at an early age, and the story that goes is that it was summer, he was very hot, so the maid dunked him in a well or some cold water, and he couldn't walk after that. And how he got cured, but he would walk with a cane for his entire life, was this Indian medicine doctor comes by, and we did have one in the county, and said, "I'll cure you." And he took Charles down to the local slaughterhouse and put him wrapped in the entrails of a freshly killed cow until it cooled off. And he did this numerous times, and Charles eventually became able to walk. I don't think they do that anymore. He was called Major as a nickname. Nobody knows why. Like his brothers, he was local subscription school and tutors, but he was sent to Cape, to St. Vincent's College down there. I think he was only the second person to graduate after the school had founded, and I think he was down there about 4 or 5 years. He came back and started to read law with Furman, but then decided he was going to get in the newspaper business. At first, he started in 1853 with something called the Plain Dealer, and we have some Plain Dealer copies from 1853 and 1861 that I got some of this stuff from. He bought it, and then he renamed it the Creole. And then he became the clerk of the circuit and county courts, and in 1859 he marries Marie Emily Lagrave. And if you know who the Lagraves are, Antoine Lagrave was a Canadian miner who came down here, and he ends up buying the land, or selling the land to what became St. Joe Lead Company. So another well-to-do family. They lived in the J.B. Valley house on the corner of Main and Market, where J.B., the big house. They would have 8 children. Eventually, he would go to St. Louis and become a partner with Gross, Joseph Gross. But he came back in 1869, and he specialized. He was a specialist in probate law in St. Genevieve as a lawyer. He served on the first board of regents for what was called the Normal School, which is now Southeast Missouri State College. They were the ones that selected where that school was going to be. He was elected mayor here at 2 different times, 1874 to 1876, and then from 1879 to 1897. He's the longest serving mayor that we've ever had. Emily died, he died here in St. Genevieve. Emily died and she had moved back to St. Louis and died there, but they are buried here in St. Genevieve in the Lagrave plot.
What was her maiden name?
She was Marie Emily Lagrave. For a while, he left us another great architectural treasures. That house on the left was the home of Charles C. Rozier. It was located behind the old brick where the parking lot is now. Jim and I were at the Mercantile Library going through. Is that my time? No. We were going through this file of Ernest Connolly's, and we came across this picture, and we both gasped. And we go, "Where is this?" But it was there, and he had a law office in this little building on Market Street. You can see it's across from where the B store is now. Yeah. The house was torn down in 1952 to make room for the Ford car dealership. The office was for sale in 1913 for $1,250. I don't think we found when it was actually torn down. But what a magnificent house. I mean, the Roziers, when you look at Francis and Felix and Furman and Charles, they had a great eye for architecture. The last of the boys was one named Ahmad Edward, and sometimes he goes by Edward A. And he was educated in the local school and then St. Vincent's College. Ferdinand believed in education. And in 1850, he was sent to learn the mercantile business at Furman Delos's. And he went to the gold field also with Omer Gabord. And on his way home, he would stay with Adolphe. He became editor of the Plain Dealer. I think his name's over there on the left, and this is from 1853. Then in 1854, he marries a girl named Lavinia Skews. Not really a St. Genevieve name, but she was from they married at Richwoods, Missouri, but her parents lived at New Bourbon, just down the road here. So when they came back to St. Genevieve, they lived with the Skews. He was served as a public administrator, a county judge. They only had 2 sons when he died. At 1858, he was only 25 years old. He was really the only one that died young. And he was buried next to his parents in the Rozier grave. She would eventually move to Farmington and died in 1903 or 1902. In 1903, she was moved to Valley Springs. So that's the last of the Rozier children. That's a phenomenal history of those. So let's talk a little bit about stores. 180 years of merchandising by the Rozier family until the last store named Rozier closed. So I mentioned in 1822 they had started a store. It was a log cabin in Perryville, and eventually a brick building was built. This one was opened in 1903. That's a 1908 picture of the store in Perryville. They advertised a business based on honest principles and fair dealing with reliable goods at reasonable prices. They had some great sales statements over the years. That they celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2003. Well, Ferdinand came back, and as I said, he bought the business from his father, and that was on the corner of Washington and Main. And it was the right half of this building. He would go later on to build an additional warehouse there. He bought it, for $300. And then he would sell it to his 2 brothers, Francis and Felix, for $600 in 1851. And it was called F.C. Rozier and Sons before he sold it to Felix, but it was quick sales and the smallest possible profits. Their gentlemanly, civil, and polite clerks will cheerfully show you their stock whether you buy or not. Good salesman. In 1874, they bring Francis Jokers in. It becomes Rozier and Jokers. Then Henry is, by that time, Henry L. owns the business, and he sells the business to Francis, and his brother, Francis Jokerson, becomes Jokerson Brother name. In 1898, they moved to the corner of Merchant and Main, in what we now know as the Show Me Shop. It was called the Rozier Cash Store. Before that, the Wilder brothers had run a business there. They would last from 1898 to 1912. Found where they were coming in 1898 and when they were going out in 1912. So in St. Genevieve, we have this in and out of the Rozier mercantile going on. When your fingers don't work, you got to put tabs on there. So another one of the great pictures of St. Genevieve, they moved over to just down the street from this building. It was called the Oakenfoos building, but we knew Oakenfoos Hardware as the one on the corner. But they had moved here in 1926. 1927, they had a big sale and they offered $100 of gold. The next year, they offered a car. This is 1928. And you got chances by buying stuff in the store. So this is the crowd that gathered when they pulled this out. And what was kind of unusual, the guy that won was Charles White, who was not white, but a lot of people congratulated him at that time. You can see it was right next to the Herald building. So they would be here, well, they had their policy was called to sell for cash and cash only. Profits on each sale will be close. We will not buy cheap or shoddy merchandise. But give us your money in cash. So then, over in like the corner of 3rd and Merchant, on where the DeBerg Center is now, Jokerston Yearly, that was the Union Hall of Tavern, Dance Hall, till 1906, I believe, and then they tore it down. Jokerston Yearly built the building there. It burnt in 1821, and in 1822 they reopened it. That's an 1831 picture looking down Merchant Street. And so the Rozier store was over by the museum, but in 1936 they started leasing the bottom floor of that building. And they would eventually buy it from Jokerston Yearly, and it would become Rozier Store. It kind of got a facelift in 1971, but before that, they had in 1939 they had added a Ben Franklin store, which every time we'd come to St. James, the kids would want to go down to the Rozier store and buy something, keep it going. So you can see a little bit of the Rozier or the Ben Franklin store. The store would be the last of the Rozier stores to close in 1995. Just a wonderful, wonderful tradition. Go back to Jules, who had started the one down in St. Mary's. He started there in 1852, 1873. He started at the landing first, and then in 1873 he moved to St. Mary's. What they said his marketing technique was to change to open displays rather than behind counters and locked away merchandise. Courtesy, salesmanship, advertising, frequent gigantic sales and discounts, and always having the latest and newest merchandise. They were good marketeers. It would have its 100th anniversary, and then the next year it would close. It was a big to-do in the paper, New York papers. Yeah.
What was on his head?
A crown.
Oh.
Well, this was a full-page thing. They kind of had people holding gifts. That's Perryville, obviously. I think that one's Farmington. So, again, great marketeers. One of the things I found out, there was a Cape Girardeau store. And because I found newspaper articles, it was called the Mammoth Store. It was on the corner of, Harmony and Main Street. Well, there's no Harmony at Main Street anymore. Now it's Broadway. And it said it was on the southwest corner. So this is the building that's on the southwest corner, but I don't think it's the original store. This store would only last for 2 years, and then they decided to get out of the business. But again, you can see the kind of things that they're selling in 1850 to people. Indigo plaids, linen napkins, some of this stuff I really don't even know what it is. Irish linen, but horse collars, rifles, they were full service. Then there's a store in Jackson. Now this store, I think it started about 1927. They purchased the Sherman Hardware store and had it there for a while. And in 1938, they started the construction of this building. That's where a filling station had been there. By 1998, it's no longer listed in the phone book, so we think the demise, maybe that was the last Rozier store. I'm not sure, Joe, would it have been? If it went to 1997, that would be 2 years after St. John, so I don't know. It was on High Street and Center.
Well, the last one is the one currently in Perry.
Yeah, I guess that would be true. But didn't that the Lottises buy that eventually and became it?
Yeah, with some financial help.
Yeah. So I grew up in Farmington, and in 1926 they came back. Remember, he had been there in 1853. They come back and build a store. This is the post office. That's the one right next to it. You can find a good picture of that. But one of the things about Rozier stores, they had something called Tough Nut Jean Days. Yeah. This is a 1959 ad. I'm 13 years old. The cuffs on the jeans, we put them up about that high, so you didn't get your bicycle chain. Right? And you got a tough nut knife. And I'm sorry, I have my tough nut knife. So my mom probably took me to this sale in 1959. So I'm pleased to have a tough nut knife.
I got the pants 5 years later.
But not the knife.
No cuffs were on it.
Yeah. That store would close in 1986. So. Now the one thing, so I've been mentioning stores, I also have to mention called Rozier's Park. They might know where that was? Yeah. It was originally called Groby's Grove. And it was out where the drugstore is and some of the bank buildings. I saw it called Rozier's Park and Rozier's Grove, both the park as early as 1923, and it was still in 1952 it's being called Rozier's Grove. In 1933, the Knights of Columbus erect this big dance pavilion out there, 90 by 40 feet long. So that was a very popular place. It would be offered for sale in 1959. The county fair would be held there in 1945 to about 1956. There was no county fair for a number of years, so in 1945 they decided we're going to do it. And then when they started about 1955 with the city park out Pere Marquette Park, it was kind of the demise of Rozier's Park. Did you know there was a golf driving range there?
Zongo.
Was it? The name of it?
It was next to that.
Next to that.
Yeah.
Rural region is it?
1962.
Derby is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And to pick up golf balls.
Yeah.
I remember it well.
So this is kind of the end. Ferdinand's legacy is phenomenal. It's children, family, it's businesses, architect. I call them, as I said at the beginning, the post-colonial premier family of St. Genevieve. 183 years of mercantile stores. I haven't included yours yet in that, Joe. I've got to do that. But it was a multi-generation family of what was called merchant princes. And not princess, but there's probably a few of them in there. But I mean, that is a remarkable thing to have a track record of being in business for over 200 years. Thank you. Oh. That statue is in the museum around the corner, and it was donated to the museum, and that's Ferdinand Rozier. So, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And thank all of you for participating in our Rozier-Audubon weekend here, sponsored by Audubon's Restaurant. So we hope you enjoyed all of our speaker presentations, and especially our new exhibit there. Really put together by our lead researcher, Carolyn Bach, and we're so pleased to have that display now. So thank you so much. If you haven't gotten a commemorative card, come up and get one, and thank you so much.
Thank you.